All right. I think we are live. Okay, yes. All right. Welcome to the session, everyone. Thanks for coming in. Happy Sunday. Hope everyone is doing well. We are now in our 23rd, I think, Sacred Space session here on August 23rd. Hope everyone is safe and well. And I want to welcome you and thank you for joining me in the session. So I am, as always, honored to be with you here in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty, and I look forward to sharing time with you in our shared sacred space together today. So the things I want to do together in our time here today is I want to I'll set sacred space, and then I'll talk about an overall topic, and the topic today will be the sacred and profane in conceptions of God. Now, obviously, that can be a really big topic, and what I'm going to try and do is just cover one small kind of corner of this question, just to try and start to give you a flavor of, we talk about the sacred and profane in art and beauty and archetypes, and we've spoken in general about what is the sacred, what is the profane, and I think one of the kind of interesting zoom-in topics or ways of thinking about things is to kind of see how the sacred and profane play out in different topics and areas of our life. So the sacred and profane in, for instance, parenting, or in relationships, or in conceptions of God, or in art and beauty. So I thought today would be a good time to just touch on the idea of sacred and profane in conceptions of God, to give you a flavor of what that kind of feels like, and then you can kind of dive deeper on your own from that. Now that you've got the scent, right? We'll do a small exercise around that, and then so I'll try to keep that first section shorter, and we'll close sacred space. And then this week we'll leave maybe about half an hour after we close sacred space to do Q&A, and Gauri, my editor in Bangalore, will be on screen with me, and she'll walk us through some of the questions that you've posted in the past, I think probably 3 or 4 weeks, and we'll try to sort of get to those as well. And the reason I prefer to have Q&A outside of sacred space is that, as I've said in the past, sometimes in the questions, things will come up around like programs that we offer here, in the Profanum, right, sort of for money, which is fine. But I prefer to, if we're gonna skirt around questions like that, I prefer to just do that outside of sacred space, just to keep things clean, and also so that we can enjoy sacred space as well, so that I can enjoy sacred space as well. All right. So in setting sacred space, what we want to do today, as in all of these sessions, is we want to, our intention is to create a space together, devoid of fear, threat, and control, for us to open to higher guidance from within our own selves. However we define that higher guidance. It could be intuition, it could be insight, it could be the muse, right? However we think about it. But the idea here is, however you choose to do it, we want to create that safe sanctuary space for us all together to relax and surrender with no feeling of danger or threat, so that we can partake of the emotional nourishment and spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. One way to think about it is that we all come together to create, together, right, with our presence and attention, this feast of emotional nourishment and spiritual nourishment that is bigger than, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, right? So it's even bigger than anything we could create independently on our own, and it's pretty inexhaustible, right? And so we come together to create this feast so that we can all gorge and nourish ourselves off of this. And ironically, the nature of sacred space is that the more you drink in the nourishment of the safety, of the security, of the, absence of fear, threat, and control, and the welling up of love, nourishment, and surrender, nurturing and surrender, the more that resource grows, right? So it's not a zero-sum game. It increases as you draw more from the well, if you will. So in opening Sacred Space today, I will propose that to do that, we will follow the principles of confidentiality, the 4 principles of Presidian Sacred Space. The first is confidentiality. We will do that via anonymization, right? So it's online, anyone can access, it's free and open to everyone. So if you want to chat or ask questions and you wish to be anonymous, you don't have to. In Crowdcast, what you would do, if you're in Facebook, you would come into Crowdcast to be anonymous. You would go into the edit profile of Crowdcast, change your name to Mickey Mouse or Harry Potter or whatever, and then post your question under that username. You can ask questions in the comments on Facebook, and then we will sort of look through the comments and pull those questions for our next Q&A session that we do. So that's the first principle. The second principle is that there is no threat or controlling, no fear, right? No fixing, no tough love. In other words, we're holding space for each other to be however we are, with no expectation that we are expected to go in and help heal anyone or fix anyone or intervene. And also, conversely, no expectation that anyone will actually interfere with me to try and say, no, don't be sad, don't cry, or you shouldn't be so happy, look at all the suffering in the world. There's none of this. There's no intervention. Because the point of Sacred Space is that we feel safe in the presence of each other, protecting us, co-protecting, to be however we actually are, right? To be afraid, to be anxious, to be happy, to be relaxed, to be okay with the fact that we're happy or relaxed, or to feel guilty and mortified that we're happy and relaxed in this time of, especially here in Northern California, we have COVID, economic, sort of issues with the pandemic, and there are wildfires everywhere. I'm here in my little studio with a couple of air purifiers on, everything locked down, but at least we all already had our masks, right? So, this safe space to be however you are, right, and to know that no one will interfere with you, and to honor that for other people as well. Third principle, a corollary: no commerce. So nothing may be sold or recommended or even suggested, whether it's for money or not money, right? So if someone says something and you're like, oh yeah, there's this great book you should read, even that we don't do, because the implication there is, I'm feeling down and you stick this book in my face, and the implication, no matter the wonderfulness of your intention, is that, well, now I have this extra to do on my list. If I don't read this book, it could be the key to everything, and I'll feel like even more of a dunderhead for not having done it, right? So that fear, threat, and control. No tough love. So on the commercial side, absolutely nothing may be sold or recommended. I can't sell you anything. We are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. We are here for what you are, not for what you do or provide. And then the fourth is that there's no expectation of participation. So there's no pressure to do anything, to chat or not chat, to ask questions or not ask questions. You can jump in and out of the session. You can jump in and out of Facebook. It's whatever you want. You come and go as you please. Because again, the nourishment comes from the held space and your presence and attention, from what you are and not what you do or provide. And all of us together will amplify that. And there's many of us here, right? So if a few of you need to come and go, that's perfectly fine. And what we found in the several months we've been doing this is that even when people come in and just watch the replay, they feel the power of the sacred space. The replay seems like, it's cut off and it's disembodied and everything, and all that's true. But I guess the counterpoint is that the replay, all of us here we're creating the sacred space. We have this intention. We're infusing the space, each other, with our energy and power and intention and care, right, and protection. And all of that, gets sort of codified in the replay video as well. I'm not talking about spiritual stuff. It's that when you watch it, right, and you hear a little bit from the chat and everything, you feel what we're doing here, and you feel that as well. So anyway, this is what I propose. And if you are not okay with it, that's totally okay. There's no fear, threat, or control to like force you to stay in sacred space either. But we're about to step into it now. So we're going to, if you're not okay with it, totally okay. We will give you a moment now to withdraw from the group. And we'll catch up with you later in the Profanum. We'll still hang out, no worries at all. But if you're not okay with entering into sacred space, now would be the time to withdraw. And we'll give you a moment to dial that in. Okay. And so for now, we will all move together into sacred space. And just a reminder, in our sacred space together now, we will maintain the principles of confidentiality, no fear, threat, or control, no tough love, no intervening, no commerce, no expectation of participation. Okay. All right. Welcome, welcome. So let's dive into our topic. So what I thought we'd talk about this week, following on the heels of last week where we talked about sacred and profane in art and beauty, I wanted to talk this week briefly about the sacred and profane in conceptions of God, which is related, right, to the idea of sacred and profane in art and beauty. And how we traditionally think about art and the different forms of art, and how now we think about God and the different angles and views, aspects of this entity, this force we call God. Okay. Now, this is potentially a huge topic, but I want to keep it short so we save extra time for Q&A after Sacred Space. And so I want to try and approach this topic today by trying to just touch at the jugular of the issue. And to give you a little bit of background, so I was raised Catholic in New York. Right, I went to Catholic school. I went to Jesuit all boys high school. So that's kind of the Judeo-Christian tradition that I've traditionally come from. So my conception of God has transformed since then, but still, I still sort of have the mythos, right, that was instilled in me from those days. Even though I may transform it, I may dress it differently, I may engage with it differently. The core starting point for me is still from there. So that's kind of the perspective I'm coming from. Okay. And when you think about sacred and profane, so in Catholic school, especially, I mean, the Christian tradition and the Judeo-Christian tradition, also in the Muslim Islamic tradition, there's a certain thing we say about the nature of God. Now, eventually, this ends up being the same thing in Hinduism and Buddhism and other systems. But specifically with the Abrahamic God, right? The God of Abraham is the God that we worship in as Jews, as Christians, and as Muslims, right? We all worship this God of Abraham. And so this is the sort of core conception that I'll start with here. So Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all actually worship the exact same God, right? Allah is Yahweh, is God the Father. And all our arguments, atrocities across history, loss of life, are not actually one God versus another. It's all about the details under this one God. And so just from that, there's like eons of grief to be digested, just from that one aspect of it. But we're not going to go into that today. So in that tradition, at least as it was taught to me in my Catholic school. Any Catholic school alum, any Sunday school alum will tell you that, well, what do we know about God? What do we know about God? We know three things. We know that God, well, obviously it's a patriarchy, so we'll say he, right? He, even though when you press, a sort of modern, especially American sort of priest, he'll try to dissemble and say, well, we mean they, but we still use he out of tradition, ha ha ha. So so there's four things. The first thing is we call him a he because, in our society it's a patriarchy, so we default to that. But in terms of the essential nature of this entity, that we know is beyond he or she, but we still sort of have our own biases. Okay, we know three things. God is omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient. Now, when you go back to the session I did on the Tao Te Ching and the nature of reality, in a manner of speaking, that foots. It's all consistent. And in the Hindu system, when you think about, the pantheon of the Hindu sort of tradition, above it, right, is Brahma, right, which is the one which is just reflected in all these different gods and goddesses, right? And in the Tao Te Ching, the nature of reality, there is only one thing. There are not many things. There's only one thing. There is no second thing. But then it reflects and plays pretending it's many things. Okay, and we explained all about how that happens, the role of words, the role of naming, et cetera, et cetera. So here in the Abrahamic tradition, when pressed, we say, okay, so what is the nature of God? What do we know about God? We'll say omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. What does this mean? Right? Well, it means all-powerful, all-pervasive, all-knowing, hallelujah, God Almighty, glory, praise, and honor. Right, all that. So there is that aspect of it. And then, of course, your local rabbi will start making jokes about, well, if God is, all powerful and omnipotent, can he make a stone that's so big that he himself can't move it, right? So there are all these sort of logic traps that you can play with as well. But the most interesting aspect to me, when I reflect upon my, upbringing as in the Catholic tradition, and in many other traditions as well, is how we tend to wield these aspects of the divine. Right? So I don't know about you, but the way it was taught to me, right, in Catholic school was that omnipotence means that God is all-powerful. And of course, the finger has to come out. All-powerful. He can do anything. He can do anything. He's all-powerful. He's more powerful than you. So you better watch out. You better watch out, right? He'll smite you. Right there in the Old Testament, smiting left and right enemies of the Hebrews, right? And of course, I'm like the nerdy idiot who is like, yeah, but we're not Hebrews, we're Catholic. Shut up, Artie, right? Detention. Right? There's certain questions you learn pretty quickly, like you get demerits even for asking, let alone like getting an answer. So he's omnipotent, right? All powerful. He can do anything, so you better watch out. Omnipresent. Well, that means he's everywhere, right? It's like a surveillance state. It's like Facebook, Google. He's everywhere, right? Which means you can't run. He'll catch you, right? If you're up to no good, he will catch you. He will punish you. So there's no escaping the long arm of the law of the Lord Almighty. So you'd better watch out, right? Even when nobody else is watching and you're alone in your room, right? And you do your naughty things, he sees you because he's everywhere and he'll catch you. And then finally, omniscience. Well, how is omniscience interpreted and wielded? Classically, it's that, well, God knows everything. He's everywhere. He sees everything, but he also knows everything. So you can't hide even in your thoughts. Even in your thoughts. He knows even your dark secret thoughts that you don't even tell your spouse, that you don't even admit consciously to your own self. He knows you're a sinner deep in your sinner's heart, so you'd better watch out. You better watch out. So the whole point of omnipotence, omnipresence, and omniscience is you better watch out. There's no escape for you, and you're sort of this sorry, sort of bumbling, dunderhead of a sinner. And so repent, right? Submit, be afraid. Explicitly, you are taught to be afraid, be obedient, control, right? And follow my command, right? Fear my threat as his representative on earth. And I'm the preacher, I'm the priest, I'm the nun, right? I'm the bishop, whatever it is. So I'm not saying this is a bad thing, and I'll get to that, right? But this coloring of the omniscience, the omnipotence, and omnipresence of God, which the Buddhists, the Taoists, the Hindus would not argue with. It is in certain traditions wielded with the tinge of fear, threat, and control. Fire and brimstone, fear, threat, and control, which by our definition is deeply, profoundly profane. Profane. Right? All powerful, everywhere, all knowing, therefore fear and repent. All profane. Now, we're all used to this. It's practically a comical thing. Right? Now, we don't laugh out loud. We want to be respectful of those who are still like taking it seriously. But we kind of inwardly roll our eyes. But then we also wonder, well, maybe it could be true. So just keep quiet about it. And you still pray quietly every now and then, ask for a by your leave. But you just leave the whole thing alone because it just doesn't, it feels a bit off. Right? It feels a bit off. This profane conception of God. This fear, threat, and control lens on God. Even if there were an apologist here who would say, well, God also loves you. God, and it's sort of like, okay, the way that is often wielded. And now, again, there are good reasons for this, and I'll get to that, right? Is, well, God loves you, and if you still sin, he's going to know. But, what a heel you are, right? What a jerk, what a sort of asshole you are. When God loves you so much, you still sin, right? So even the love is twisted around to like guilt you into doing the thing, the right thing. Now, people will say, and this is a valid argument, well, Artie, come on, you have to be reasonable here, right? We know God, loves you. You can probably throw yourself on his mercy after being a sinner and a serial killer all your life. And he'll probably just shoo you in and let you in anyway, because ultimately, his love is unconditional, right? And if you truly believe God's love is unconditional, then you have no fear, right? How could you have fear? Right? Even in the parenting program, I'm like, you just reiterate to your child that your love is unconditional, and they don't have fear of you or losing your love anymore. Right. But then the district attorney, the chief of police within you or within society will say, well, if we don't do that, if we say saints and sinners alike will get into heaven, then what kind of society are we going to have? There's going to be no more law and order. And by the way, that's a valid argument. We do want law and order in our society. I do want to be able to sit here and not have my internet cut off and not have, bandits and pirates, break into my place with no sense of security. Okay. The question, though, is to say that if you don't let us wield God with fear, threat, and control, we will, fear, threat, and control, have no more law and order. So you have to let us do this, or else, right? Let us use God in this profane manner, or else further threat, or else fear, threat, and control, or else, society will completely fall apart. Now, on the one hand, that's a valid argument. It's like we do want law and order. But on the other hand, that argument itself is an argument of the profane. right? So the conception of God in that system is fully pulled into the realm of the profane, to the point where priests, deacons, bishops, I mean, I know because I've worked with a lot of them, have incredible crises of faith that they try to stuff down out of fear, threat, and control. They have doubt because they're like, I don't in my heart. I mean, I became a priest in the first place, not out of fear, not just because my parents told me to, but because I felt this like heart-bursting love for God. And now I'm preaching every Sunday, and I'm kind of being directed to preach this like, sociological, sort of societal control sort of view of God. And I don't know, I mean, this is what God is supposed to be. I don't know if I believe in God anymore, right? And they have these crises of faith, even though the heart-bursting love is still there, it never went away. Right? And the quintessence of this kind of a conflict within a person even is the conflict of the blend of sacred versus profane, not as you look at art, right, proper and improper art, but as you look at God herself, right, herself. Okay. So in other words, as I've said before, profane is not bad, right? I'm not saying profane is evil, sacred is good, and now you've made God into evil, right? That's absurd. So profane is just profane, sacred is sacred. Just like when we talked about Chinese cooking in the last session, it's like fat, salt, sweet. None of them are good, none of them are evil. It's the blend. So in a person's conception of God, what is the blend of sacred and profane? What does profane even taste like? What does sacred even taste like and feel like in your heart, in your mind? And this is kind of the flavor profile I'm trying to touch the jugular of to give you, right? So you can, just like with art, you're like, oh, that's profane art. That's like didactic art. That's pornographic art. This is sacred art. It's static. It's not kinetic. It doesn't make me move toward or away from. And then you decide, what kind of art do you like? I like a blend. I like 90% proper art. I like 90% improper art. Right? I love watching Super Bowl ads, right? Because they make me like move back and forth. And I like that. And that's okay. As long as you know the mix, what each one tastes like, you can choose for yourself. Right? In this session, certainly, it is a sacred space. Right? So there's no fear, threat, or control over like it should be this mix or that mix. I'm just giving you these kind of interesting perspectives. And then you choose, because sovereignty always resides with you. Right? Even when you accept a priest or a preacher's conception of God as threatening, as punishing, right? In the realm of fear, threat, and control, the profane view of God, you're choosing to do that, right? And I'm not saying that to blame you. I'm like, you're choosing to do that because you are the sovereign, right? You always have sovereign power. People may do the con man thing on you, may hoodwink you, and dupe you into believing you don't have sovereign power. But you do. But you do. Okay, so that's the profane lens on God. Not bad. It's just one flavor. So then what about the flip side, right? What would the sacred lens on God look like? So let's take these same three things and see what they may mean instead if you didn't interpret them using the lens of fear, threat, and control, but you interpreted them using the lens of the sacred, devoid of fear, threat, and control, and infused, kind of de facto, right? Because the way I think about it, it's not, oh, the sacred is love, nurturing, and surrender, or else. No, that's profaning it. That's fear, threat, and control. It's like you gently remove fear, threat, and control, and it's like there's a void there. And once you remove fear, threat, and control, it's like a vacuum, right? And what the air that comes in that vacuum, de facto, not by your intention, it just ends up being love, nurturing, and surrender. You don't have to do it, under threat with a gun to your head. Like love me or else, surrender and nurture me or else. It's like just remove fear, threat, and control, remove the gun. And that just is what's left over, because that's the only other thing, right? So with these three things, I'm I want to look at the same three things because it does make sense that God would be omnipotent and omnipresent and omniscient, right? But is there a way of feeling into these three things without the extra stab of fear, threat, and control? Well, let's see. And the way I've thought about these three aspects, when I think about them, the same three things with the lens of the sacred, I'll just tell you in my personal experience, it brings me closer to God. And it is the following sort of more sacred way of feeling these same things. So in the case of omnipotence, it's not that he or she can do anything. It's that she does do everything. Right? That's the other way of interpreting omnipotence. You know, omni is all, potent is power. Right? So all powerful within this, like, you know, proscenium arch stage, I'm all powerful, I can do anything. Right? So you better look out. Right? But the flip of that is to say within this proscenium arch stage, I am doing everything. I'm every actor on the stage. I'm the proscenium arch. And I am the entire theater. I'm everything. I'm doing everything. Which leads us to omnipresence. It's not that within this world where we fear whether he'll see us or not, he can be anywhere and everywhere. But that omnipresence, right, he, she, God, is everywhere. Omnipresence means, right, God is everywhere. Because, and thus he is everything. Right, it's not God is everywhere, you dumb slob. Right, so like, look out, he's looking over your shoulder. No. Because that presumes, right, fear, threat, and control. God is everywhere. So omnipresent God is everywhere. Everywhere except where you are standing. Like, you're the one dumb slob who takes up space with your body and mind and cheating sinner's heart, right? And you're the one place God does not exist, even though we say omnipresent, right? So that he can spy on you and surveil you and see you, the one thing that is not God, the one place somehow that he is not present in, and shame you and send you to hell, right? Those are the kind of pretzel twist gyrations you need to make logically to force fit, right, the utter ultimateness of God into a petty sort of fear, threat, and control, profane paradigm. Right, so in other words, it's not that God is always looking over your shoulder. God is your shoulder too. God is your cheating heart too. Right, God is everywhere. Therefore, she is everything. And omnipotence, she does everything. Right, you say one of these, you say the other. Omnipresence and omnipotence are the same thing. And then the third one, omniscience. It's not, again, this subject-object spying thing where God knows all your thoughts, right? I know everything. I know everything you do. I know every thought you think. So again, it's not that God knows every thought, but that God thinks every thought. Right? Omniscient, shint is knowing. Conscience, science, right? Shient is to know. All knowing, right? So not just that I know every thought, but I think every thought as well, which makes sense because, you know, God is everything, omnipresent. So she obviously is doing everything, omnipotence. And if she's doing everything, then she's thinking every thought as well, omniscience. Omni, right? Omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscience. They are different aspects of one and the same thing. They can be twisted into this fear, threat, and control thing. But when you look at what it actually means, especially in light of the Tao Te Ching nature of reality talk I did a couple months ago, it is completely consistent, right? She is doing everything, thinking everything, and is everything because there is only one thing that actually exists. And so the sacred lens on the Abrahamic God. not the profane, the sacred lens of the Abrahamic God is in complete agreement with the Hindu lens, with the sacred lens of the Hindu sort of ultimate, and the sacred lens of Buddhism, Taoism, all the rest of them. And it makes sense because at the ultimate, we're all talking about the same thing, right? And then just a further clarification within the Abrahamic system. When we say God is everything, does everything, and thinks every thought, we do mean everything, like the good and the bad thoughts. God does the good and the bad things. God is the good and the bad things, what we call good and bad. From the Old Testament, Isaiah, I, the Lord, create light and darkness. I, the Lord, create good and evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. And even the word repent, right, which in Greek is metanoia, doesn't necessarily mean like repent, be sorry, be afraid, you dumb slob, right, you dunderhead. But metanoia means to transform your mind, to change your mind, to turn your mind, which is much more, and this is a longer discussion, much more in line with the idea of awakening and enlightenment, right? And a transformation of your mind, transformation of consciousness, similar to the one we're talking about here, where you see God itself with the lens of the sacred, not the profane, where you see art and beauty through the lens of sacred, not the profane, where you see your whole life through the lens of the sacred, not the profane. What do you see? Right? The God that is one thing, the God that is you, and of course loves you, because you are the same as God, because God is everything, so God is you too. It's not, God is me, so like, oh yeah, everyone bow to me. No. God is everything. There's only one thing. So it also makes sense that God loves you without condition, because just like I love my lungs without condition, my lungs don't have to be good lungs for me to love them. I may be upset at them, but I love them without condition, right? So you're like, oh, I'm a poor slob, I don't deserve God's unconditional love. It's like you don't really have a choice, right? There is only one thing that actually exists, and you can pretend not to know it. You can play games where we agree not to admit it and carry on, so keep calm and carry on. And if you want to do that, that's okay. But the reason that's okay, if you want to pretend to be a slave, that's okay. But let's be clear, the reason it's okay for you to choose to pretend to be a slave is because you are sovereign. Right? If you weren't sovereign and you were a slave, then you wouldn't have that choice in the first place. At the very fact that you can say, well, for him maybe, but not for me, and I'm just, oh, woe is me. The fact that you get to choose that narrative proves that you are the sovereign. Right? And self-help people will say, well, you can choose that, why don't you choose the good one? And they kind of browbeat you into saying, be well or else, be mindful or else, be calm, be zen or else, right? They profane even that, right? So I'm not laughing at the people who worship the God of Abraham and saying, oh, haha, they use a profane lens, what a tragedy. I'm trying to bring out the ease, the naturalness with which we slip from the sacred into the profane. So even in the sort of wellness industry, right, there's a lot of fear, threat, and control, where you have to be calm or else. And even if nobody sees you like break down and cry and lose it, you see yourself and you're like, oh my gosh, like all these years of yoga, all these years of therapy down the drain. And it's like you're hitting yourself with a stick of fear, threat, and control. Right? So if you get to do that, it's because you are sovereign. And so for me, what I always say is, you come to me, we're doing this advising, I'm advising you, I'm not curing you. I'm like, you're doing this to yourself. And if you want to keep doing that, that's okay. I mean, everybody likes different kinds of things, so if you like it, then keep doing it. So this love between ourself and God, right, is this kind of sense of unconditional self-love, right? Because, this thing called God is you, but then that image dissolves as well, because there's only one thing that actually exists. So when you look around, you see God everywhere, and you have the feeling that I am God looking at myself. And this is kind of what you see when you, if you perhaps have a metanoia or changing of consciousness after you listen to something like the Tao Te Ching talk I gave, right? You see that there is only one thing that actually exists. You see intuitively why there's no name for it, because there's only one thing. So you can't name something if it's the only thing. And then typically what happens is you relax, you like sit on a park bench for a couple weeks or a couple of years, just like giggling and smiling at everything. And then you're like, okay, well, wait, why was I, shrouded in like not knowing this in the first place? Oh, I remember now. I got bored being the only thing. And I said, well, let's play a game, and let's, play hide and seek. And when you realize that, you like, with joy and delight and bliss, you plunge back into the movie. It's like you watch a scary movie and you're like, oh my gosh, and someone says, oh, we're in a movie, you can go to the exit. And you run out of the exit. And you're like, oh my gosh, thank God that's over. And then you're in the lobby of the movie theater going like, it's kind of boring out here. I mean, I can get more popcorn, but let's get more popcorn and go back in, right? Because you realize, like, I paid for that movie, so I want to go back and enjoy it, This is why we say in Genesis, in the Abrahamic Bible, right, when God to Moses names himself or identifies himself through the burning bush, he says, I am. I am. Right? Or I am who am. Right? It's not I am God as opposed to something else. It's not I am the bush as opposed to everything that's not the bush. I'm everything. And I can't even say everything because that's opposed to nothing. And it's like, I am. I am beingness. I mean, basically, when you're the only thing, and you have to like say it in words, what do you say? Right? So God is the one thing. He cannot smite you actually. You are him. Right? He can pretend to smite the thing that we name you in the game, but that's the profane lens. And again, the profane is not bad, but I'm just saying that's not the only lens. Right? Just like salt, fat, and sweet. Salt's not bad, but it's not just salt. There's fat and sweet as well. And you can blend it. So it's not just the profane, it's also the sacred. And from the sacred lens, there is only one thing that actually exists, God. God is everything, omnipresent. So she does everything, omnipotent. And she thinks every thought, good thoughts and bad thoughts, even the naughty thoughts, omniscient. So the core truths of this God of Abraham point to the same underlying reality. You don't need to be a Taoist or a Buddhist or a Hindu and do like the ground of being thing and the shunyata emptiness thing. You can if you want to. But even in the Abrahamic religions, the same reality is revealed if you can find the right kind of lens to see it through. Right? It's maybe a little harder because there's a lot of societal pressure and a lot of middle management clerics running around, and I can just use corporate culture. I don't need to bash on sort of Catholic culture or Protestant culture to sort of wink at you and say, well, we know what happens when we install middle management bureaucracy, right? The usual happens, right? The message always gets convoluted. So, so there's obviously more to this, but I think that is what I wanted to give you, just to give you like a bit of a quintessential example of the difference in flavor you get when you look at a thing. So the move is this: you look at a thing, you taste it, and you're like, this tastes profane. right? Not, ah, ha, ha, it tastes profane. It's like, no, it tastes profane. It's like very salty. I feel a lot of fear, threat, and control. Right? I feel all the recruiters standing around me going like, are you going to sign the card and give us your email or not? And it's like, it feels profane, right? And you can feel that because you know what the profane tastes like right now. It tastes of fear, threat, and control. Then once you realize that, given your muscles and everything you learned, you can switch the lens to remove fear, threat, and control, and then see what it tastes like from there. How do these things, omnipotence, omnipresence, and omniscience, make sense if I remove the threat, right? And when you do that, a completely view of God emerges, a completely different feeling of God emerges. But it's not even the God who loves you to say, oh, come on now, don't be so scared. We were just using that to get you to join the congregation. Ha, ha, ha. We're still a business too. The roof doesn't patch itself, right? But really, actually, God does love you. And you're going to get to come to heaven after all, but please still keep coming and donating, right? It's not even the sacred as that, the God who loves you, but even beyond that, to say to the God who is beyond threatening or nurturing you, to the God who actually is you, right? To the one thing and the only thing that actually exists. That for me is the highest love and nurturing surrender to God, right? To surrender to God's omnipotence. In how, not how she directs you to act, but how she acts through you, good or bad, right? How she acts through you, is you, and thinks every thought that you have, right? And this is a kind of way, not exactly, but a kind of way to describe this feeling of enlightenment. It's a little bit of a convoluted way to get there, but you still eventually get there when you're in that sacred zone enough. And this is why when you're like, I don't deserve the unconditional love of God, it's like there's no choice. You are her. It's all one thing. Okay. So that's what I wanted to say about that. And I want to sort of end a little early, close sacred space, and then we can move to Q&A. But before we do that, I just want to give you a little bit of an exercise that comes out of this discussion of the sacred and profane in God, for you to just kind of try on for size, only if you want, between today and next Sunday's session. So the exercise is just to sit quietly and alone and reflect on, well, basically how you were taught about God, right? Through family, through church, if your family didn't have a religion, through popular media, through society, how were you taught about God that felt profane, where you felt that clench of fear, threat, and control? Okay. And what about what it was you were taught about God made you feel that? Okay. And then, with that as a starting point, what then changes? How does that feeling feel different if you remove the profane fear, threat, and control? How does the image of and feeling of God change for you when you do that? Right, an example here, it's like omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent. It's like, whoa, I'm like, I can't move a muscle. I'm like a beetle under glass. And then you take away fear, threat, and control, and you look at the same three things, and you go the exact opposite to where like, I guess I am God, and I'm not going to let it get to my head because like everything around me is God too, but it's this feeling, it's not this intellectualizing, where the only way I can sort of get to these three things making sense, these three omnis making sense, when I remove fear, threat, and control, is that, what I said, right? She is everything, and doing everything and thinking every thought. So what are examples in your own life of how you felt this fear, threat, and control? And then what happens when you remove that fear, threat, and control? Does the image change? Does the archetype of God change in your mind and in your heart? And how does it change? So that's the exercise, just for fun, only if you want. Okay. So that's it for the session. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to close the session. I'm going to close Sacred Space. And then for those of you who would like to stay longer for Q&A afterwards as well, it's the same session, just stick around and we'll move into Q&A after Sacred Space. So now I'll close the session. So our next Sacred Space session is Sunday. It's free, it's open to everyone. Please invite other people. Ask all the questions you like in the question form on Crowdcast or in the comments on Facebook Live. And there's a call to action button in Crowdcast and in the post text of the Facebook Live. So you can sign up for next Sunday's session starting right now. So I hereby close this session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me, and thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, the spiritual nourishment of this shared sacred space with me. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great week, and I will see you in the next session. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right, so now we're out of sacred space and we can move into Q&A. And I will invite Gary up on screen with me. Gary, you there? Hey, Gary.
Hi, Artie. Hello.
How are you? Okay,
Good.
I can hear you just fine. Hopefully
Okay,
you can hear me too. And I'm going to flip over to my Q&A notes as well. And yeah.
Right. Okay. So we've got
whenever you're ready.
4 weeks of questions. We did the last session, I think, last week of July. So we've got a few questions collected up. And the first one, I want to start right from like the oldest question on the list. References the session on, stages of life that you covered, right? Transformations through life, stages of life for men and women in a masculine as well as in a feminine, and how, these stages of life and, the different phases get initiated for men and women. And you'd made a comment that for men, the initiation into the different stages of life is more cultural, and the triggers are more cultural, and the triggers for women and the feminine is both cultural as well as physiological. Mm-hmm. So as the woman's body changes, it kind of pushes her into transformation. So when she goes through puberty, but also through childbirth, she transforms, not just physically, but also emotionally, spiritually, and all of that. So the triggers are very rooted in her body. So the initiation happens through that. So there was a question pertinent to that point where the question is, what about when a woman gets pregnant for the first time and loses the baby, right? So it's like the transformation is kind of halted there abruptly. So isn't transformation kind of initiated but also stopped? So does that transformation go through is the question.
Okay, thank you for that. So so I guess the way I think about that question is that, so the answer in a nutshell is yes and no. Yes and no. And so there is the archetype of, pregnancy and motherhood, obviously. And, pregnancy and then losing the baby or stopping the pregnancy is one way that narrative arc can go, obviously, right? And so, but when you say transformation is stopped, So these archetypes are lenses to help us understand and make meaning out of the things we're going through. Okay. And in reality, I don't want to overcomplicate this, but in reality, there are many different archetypes in play, right, in the sort of flowing river of our lives. So for me, for instance, just take one regular guy on the street, right? So I'm a man, I'm a healer, I'm a father, right? I'm a citizen of the United States, right? I'm American, I'm ethnically Chinese, like back in my sort of heritage or whatever. And those are just the archetypes of how I self-identify, right? Then there are the archetypes of what chapter of my life am I going through now, right? And there are many different lenses with which to look at that. So the thing is, there is this emerging motherhood archetype in this case. But then if the baby is lost, and this is in real life, right? If the baby is lost, then there are all kinds of ways you can interpret that, right? And I'm not going to go into the whole thing here, but for instance, you can say, look, the changes are already triggered in your body, whether there's a baby that comes out of it or not. The transformation into quote unquote full flowering motherhood is archetypal. Which means in a sense it's metaphorical, right? So a woman might say, well, I can't have kids, so am I screwed? And the answer is absolutely not. It's like, it's not a question of biological children, right? Maybe you could have children and you choose not to have children. That doesn't sort of waive or exempt you or release you from this middle sort of phase of womanhood, motherhood, queenhood. It's metaphorical, it's archetypal, it's spiritual. Having a physical baby is one way of manifesting that, but there are many others that you would do instead of or in addition to. In addition, you can interpret, I've worked with a lot of people over the years where fertility, pregnancy, loss of pregnancy, unwanted pregnancy have been sort of recurring themes, right? So I've spent a lot of time on this as a healer. It's way too much to go into here, but you can also read the entire situation mythopoetically as if it's a dream, right? I've had advisees where they have chosen to end pregnancies and they were trying to decide. And I was like, well, I don't know what to tell you. I'm not going to tell you. I never tell you what to do. But this baby within you physically, or even the wish for a baby, is as we say in healing, a board member within you, and you can go interview it and investigate and talk to just that section of yourself. It will give you its opinions, and then it's blended into the larger sort of board of directors or committee, and then you make your decision. And I've had cases where women have come and said, I actually talked to the baby, and they were like, yeah, if you're not ready, I can come back later, right? And or they ended the pregnancy, they were distraught, and in a case like that, I was like, have you spoken to? And you're like, the baby I ended the pregnancy with, I'm like, it's still a part of you, right? Mythopoetically, right? It's absolutely still a part of you, and the proof is that you're thinking about the baby that you gave up, right, 24/7,
and you're grieving for it. Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many times the advisee has gone and talked to it, and these are not things she put in the script. It's like she resisted this fiercely, and the baby's like, no, it's fine. You're not ready. I'm going to come back later if you want. But I'm like, I don't want to make this a trivial thing, because it is a serious kind of decision and an issue. It's a big cultural issue, right? But I'll just report that advisees have come back to me and they've said, the spirit of that baby told me, not only was it okay, this head fake was part of my transformation. right? That we're, you're resisting grief on all these fronts. We couldn't get you to get into this mode, and this was, this wasn't our last resort. The voltage goes even higher on the cattle prod if need be, right? But this was our next gambit, right? And I'm not saying I believe this or this is what was told to me, right? On multiple occasions across multiple advisees, something that thing and things of that nature. I'm not saying it's the right answer. I'm not, sort of advocating that perspective. The only thing I do advocate is to go in and do your own investigation, right? In healing, that's what we always say. I say, well, these are the patterns I've seen. I don't know what's going on with you. You go talk. And often they'll come back and they'll say something completely different. It wasn't that at all. It was this other thing. And I love hearing about that in the healing groups I do, because that adds to my library of pattern. I have this huge library of like archetypal patterns now from my work. So when you tell me, it's like, yeah, it wasn't what you said at all, Artie. It was this other thing. I'm like furiously like scribbling in my notebook. And it's amazing. Yeah. So to answer the question, it's not necessarily the transformation stops, but that it takes on a certain nature. Right? The trigger for transformation has already fired. And it's not just physical, it's emotional and spiritual too. So you can interview, the baby can leave, the body itself can stop the process. The body is like, this is something I'm not ready for. I was not consulted. I do not approve. I'm stopping this pregnancy. And to find that out is the interview is the key, right? It's never one dimensional. It's the whole image and the pattern. So this feeling that like my transformation itself is aborted and I'm just stuck here and I'm this loser, right? That itself is an archetype as well. And for my money, if that's what you feel, then that's fine. But for my money, it's like, if you're going to be in the doldrums of that, then it's like, collect your pay. Don't just be in pain for like nothing, right? Grieve fully. Don't run away from it. Don't numb, don't drink water. Just sit in the pain, and you get paid for that in gold, metaphorically, right? Of the insight. Yeah. You want to just be in pain and numb it. It's like you're in the salt mine suffering, and you're saying, no, don't give me my paycheck. I'm like, no, collect your pay. If it's gonna suck, then grieve fully and extract the benefit from it. Because oftentimes that's why the forces have like stuck you in that situation. They're trying to force a metanoia on you, a transformation of consciousness, not repentance through punishment, but transformation through, but moving you forward into the next archetype or phase of life through transformation. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because when you explain this in this way about the shape of the archetypes that comes out, it made me relate to the metaphor of the butterfly and the cocoon, because it seems like even though the triggers are all just getting into the cocoon and then sitting there for days until you transform, what will emerge is always a kind of a surprise, right? So you don't know what form you're going to take. So there's a little bit of, even though it's all part of the archetype, but to find out what archetype is also part of the whole process. So even though you enter into the initiation phase and go through transformation, the shape of what you transform into is still a mystery that you have to solve. And it doesn't have to always end up with one predictable, outcome, right? So it could be something else as well. So, so that was clarifying. Thank you. There's another fantastic question on this topic of initiation for men and women. And that is, does being a single mom or single dad, for that matter, elevate the opportunity to initiate your inner masculine and your inner feminine because you take on dual societal roles, right? So that, I mean, I thought that's a brilliant question, because we all have inner masculine and inner feminine within us. But when we're taking on the roles of a parent, as a mother or a father, we move into that one archetype, kind of lean heavily into that more than, the inner, the masculine for women, right? But here, when you're a single mom, do you kind of have this opportunity which intensifies to kind of take on both the roles and initiate both the roles at the same time, because you have this additional factor coming in?
Yeah, I feel like it depends. It really depends on the case. I mean, so maybe yes. I can think of cases where being a single mom is like, will actually retard or pull back the initiation of the inner feminine, because it's like, I'm all dad, and so there are many different ways it can go. What I can say is that both always want to be initiated, inner masculine, inner feminine, within you, regardless of your gender. I mean, it's like grass wants to grow, right? It will find a way through a crack in the concrete eventually to grow through. Or an acorn wants to become an oak no matter what, right? So whatever avenues are open to it, nature will find a way. I mean, even looking at the resurgence of nature through the pandemic, right, is a stunning example. So when you lose a job, or you have a breakup, or you find yourself in the position of being a single parent for whatever reason, when you're dying to be a parent and you lose a pregnancy, right, all of these things are triggers that can serve to make you stumble into a transformation cycle or phase of life. And typically, whenever that happens, whatever part of you has been unleashed by that trigger or transformation, it picks up the ball and starts running down the field trying to score.
Right.
These forces within you start like going, and oftentimes it's a big jumble where like three of parts of you will start running, and they'll start tripping over each other because everything's completely uncoordinated. It's a big sloppy mess. It often ends up working out okay in the end. But what is really helpful is if you think through, like, what lens fits here, right? Sacred lens, profane lens, what archetype fits the pattern? And often it will be an imperfect fit, but it will be close enough for you to be able to interpret what's going on in one sort of section of it. And just having a lot of lenses to try on will give you, more lenses you have, the better chance of getting to clarity. So that you can say, I like what's happening. I want to like fan the flames and get it going. Or I don't like what's happening. I want to sort of change the arc of what's going on. And you'll often use a different lens that's like close enough, but you can like veer it off to the left versus the right. Right. And we do all this anyway. Like, you have a breakup, you something bad happens in your life. You're like stewing on it night after night anyway. You're losing sleep. You're thinking about it. So you're burning the time anyway. And when you look at it through the lens of healing, the stuff we do every week with archetypes, you're just trying to use these specific tools to kind of make meaning of things faster. So that you suffer less, basically.
Yeah. Thank you. There's a question here which takes us back to one of the first sessions on sacred space. And it goes, can you turn a profane space into a sacred space? The context is, I'm a stenographer who, so I write down every word that's happening in court. And now I'm working from home. I'm writing down what people say is very stressful, of course. Even, when there's a recording, to fix any, mistakes later. And I have a long-term habit of trying my best to get every word right. So I've long wished that I could relax while I'm working. And it's for the exact reason that trying to keep up is like having a cowboy shooting at your feet, telling you to dance, right? So it's massive fear, threat, and control. But it could also be a time without fear, threat, and control. And it could be relaxing to listen to the clicking of the keys and knowing that I'm at home and I'm safe. And it would be wonderful to turn it into a meditative practice, but is it possible?
Love that question. So yes, it's absolutely possible. So I'm not saying it's easy. It's a different lens you're putting on it, right? It's a different frame of mind.
Yeah.
And mind you, when I say, oh, just look at things through the sacred, not the profane, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's a trivial thing. Oh, just do this intellectually. At the body level, it can be quite challenging.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Right. So if you're like, I don't know if I can do that, it's like everyone's like that. Everyone, that's normal. So it's okay. So, so a couple of things. So from the healing side, so if this were like a live group advising, right, what I would say, those of you who do the live group advising every Friday with me, you're like sick of hearing me say this, right, after a couple of weeks. It's like, well, there are cowboys, right, shooting, making you dance. And what you would do is you would do the exercise from day 3 and engage with the cowboys and find out more, right? Because the cowboys are a part of you too, that you imagine. So the transformation of them from bullies into basically protectors. And then to use that as a lead into healing that part of it. And then what ends up happening is the outer will end up reflecting the inner, right? The outer jerks who are like shooting are a reflection of something within you. That's not to say it's your fault, right? Just because something comes from within you doesn't mean it's your fault, right? I may have a gene that predisposes me to a certain kind of illness. So yeah, that comes from within me, but it's not my fault, right? So, so when you find the bully jerks within you making you dance, and you reconcile with them through the healing process that we do, what will happen is that the outer will tend to reflect the inner in one of two ways. One is, so the situation in you has changed. The outer always realigns to reflect. If you believe God is threatening and his love is conditional and there is a risk of you burning in hell, and that is set in you, right? And there's no change to that archetype. Anything outside of you that does not fit that, you will move away from, right? So if I'm here saying, no, God's love is unconditional, don't worry. The social control aspects of fear, we can do that some other ways. We don't need to drag God into the task of like creating law and order in our society, right? You can leave God alone and let us enjoy our relationship with the divine, and we still won't mug the corner grocery store. There are other ways of doing that, right? And so if you have that set in you, you will move away from a voice like mine because it doesn't fit with what you believe. And that's okay. But that's an example of the outer reflecting the inner. So once it changes within you, any cowboy from the outside that starts shooting, right, there will be a boundary and there will be engagement, all these things we talk about in healing. And either the cowboy outside will change or they will drop out of your orbit. There are like hundreds of examples where like this jerk that was like torturing me at work magically got reassigned, or he left, saying, bye fools, I'm going to a better job. But now everyone's like happy again. We can breathe in the office again, right? Or you'll move out of that and move to a different job, right? Basically, once the archetype changes in you and does not fit with the outside world, something's got to give, right? Something's got to give. And so, you could turn it into a meditative practice. But if we think about this in terms of like what we've been talking about, archetypal manifestation, right? It's like if you want to turn it into a meditative practice, that's cool. You can imagine it as a meditative practice where you're dancing to avoid the bullets, not because you're afraid of them. I mean, so what if one of these emotional bullets hits you? Big deal, right? You're dancing because it's fun. But if you're going to do that, right? Oh, I wish my job was less stressful. And you're going to go through this process of bringing it to, because that's your want. You want your job to be less stressful. And then you go through the steps of archetypal manifestation. Then why not? I mean, if you're going to ask and try to make something happen, why not build, the ultimate, whatever that is? Right? It's like, so if you're gonna go to the well and try to draw water to do this magic thing of like making your job less stressful, why not draw everything you want from the well? Right? So what is your ideal job? What is your ideal life? And you're like, no, that's too big. And it's like, well, I mean, you've got the rest of your life to work on it. So there's no rush. But it's like, if you're going to if you got the courage to start asking questions like this, it's like, don't just ask her, what movie she likes. Like, you can ask her on a date. You're already talking to her. What's the worst that can happen, right? What's the worst that can happen?
It is.
There's that kind of feeling as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is so powerful to ask the question of, can I turn my work into sacred space?
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, the question of bliss, like you're, talking about in a session. It's the question of bliss, but couched in terms like, can I work and also have my sacred space?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I'm jumping forward a lot, but this is the question that starts tugging on the thread that like unravels the whole fabric or sweater or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? Because the answer is yes, you can turn it into a meditative practice, except for like all the jerks are fine except for that one really big jerk over there. And then it's like that bit of sand in the oyster where you're just like, you keep, kind of trying to deal with it. And if you get the right kind of pattern, right, you end up navigating toward your bliss.
Yeah, that's
eventually.
It's just wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Then we have an update. So this was it was a question in one of our sessions where someone asked that I want to do a sacred space with police wives because she's a police wife. And now she's given us a long update about how that went. I mean, when she did a sacred space session. It's a long update. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's just wonderful that she did manage to have a session as of the date when she wrote this, is that she had a small group of 3 women in her house and, they sat together and had a meeting. But what's lovely is
all
that
police wives, right?
They're all police wives, and they just wanted to have a space to kind of share, similar experiences. But also, the amount of self-doubt that came over her, even as she had this inspiration to have this kind of practice of sacred space. But, who am I to create sacred space? Am I doing this right? I'm not Artie. How am I qualified to do this? All those kinds of things. And also the fear that, I have my own judgments and I have my own needs. How will I be able to leave that at the doorstep while starting sacred space? Will I be able to hold my judgments back? And also, what will these women think about what I'm doing? Will they find it weird? Will they be okay with it? And despite all of that, she went right ahead. These 3 women met. And even as this is going, and she says, it didn't feel like I accomplished anything other than profane chatting. But it felt comfortable and really nice to share our perspectives with each other, knowing that they would be understood and welcomed. And maybe that managed to sneak its way in. And I'm not sure what I thought sacred space on my own would really be like. But I came away thinking, hoping maybe it helped ease some of the emotions and something really. So, and they're meeting again. And it's interesting how that came about, as both the women who had come in said that they needed to have someone help them train their dogs. And turns out the lady's husband himself was a canine officer for 14 years. And, and he volunteered to help the ladies and said, I can help you train your dogs. And then maybe after that, you could, I'll leave for work and you women can sit and chat together or whatever it is that you do. So that became the pretext to do further sacred space sessions. So now they really have like profane pretext to do this. So it seems like it's going really well, but it's like she has a lot of doubts and questions around, am I doing this right? So any additional comments or insight, if you have, is what she wanted to ask.
Yeah, so thank you so much for this. Thanks for that question. So this is so lovely. I just want to say good job. This feeling of muddling through, making your own sacred space, that's how it's going to feel. You're not messing up. That is how it feels. You are macheting your way through the jungle, looking for the trail that needs to be there, like from your village to the river, but that has been lost and overgrown in our profane society, right? So you are like Indiana Jones. I mean, the trail has to be there, right? There has to be a way for families of law enforcement officers to share sacred space and grieve and discuss, not just with the lens of the profane, but with the lens of the sacred, right? That is intrinsically healing, given everything that's been going on. That space is needed for everyone on all sides.
Yeah.
And we don't have it. So we have lost many cultural patterns for these kinds of things, how to make these sacred spaces for different situations. So for instance, for warriors returning from war, there would be ceremonies where when they returned, before they were let back into the village, before you let the man back into the hut with his wife and children, right? Where he's just been killing, right, the other tribe to defend the village. And traditional thinking was, you can't just let him back in the hut with his wife and children. He'll like wreak havoc. And he'll wreak havoc not because he's a bad person, but because he's got all this martial energy in him that we asked him to take on to defend us. And now he's coming back and we need to reconfigure him so that flamethrower doesn't shoot within the village. It's like when you bring a gun back into the house, you put the safety on, you unload it and you lock it in its lockbox. And so for warriors, we would have ceremonies where all of this stuff in sacred space would happen, where we would thank, the god of war for like protecting us, and then like send him back to say, thanks for letting us, for being with us, and we're going back in now, so we're going to worship you, but we're not going to bring you in with us, right? Because you destroy everything you go. That's okay. Before we let them back, and the domestic world otherwise would be a mess. And out in our profane world, it's like you come back, you change your clothes, right? We like do a little in the States, we do a little questionnaire survey to see if you have post-traumatic stress disorder or anything else, which is geared toward like getting you to like not tell us you have that, because then that adds cost to it, right? And that's it. You like get off a plane and your family welcomes you back. It's all smiles and flags waving, but what happens in the home after all the cameras are gone, nobody talks about. And it's often very, very difficult. So these sacred spaces are necessary. We've lost them across the board. It's nobody's fault, just like a hurricane coming through is nobody's fault. But that's why your instinct to have a sacred space for the wives of police officers, just to sit together, not complaining about the defund the police and the rioters and, but just to sit together, right? And grieve in many cases, makes perfect sense. That intuition, that impulse makes perfect sense to me. You had talked about So one of the things that happens is in sacred space is that transformation is allowed to happen because it's safe, right?
Yeah.
And if it weren't safe, you would stay clenched. When it's safe, you can actually transform, change your clothing, change your whatever. And one of the things that can transform is the archetype that you're in. And one of the things we talked about is the archetype of law enforcement in any given family, in any given unit, in any given community, in any given society, that of the warrior or the guardian, right? Are you going out to fight the enemy, or are you going out to guard and protect everyone, right? And in America, the origin of a lot of local police forces was they were literally called slave patrol. They were forces of armed police officers that would patrol sort of slave communities when slavery was still intact to keep them under control, right? So it's not guardian, it's not even warrior really, it's prison warden. It's prison warden. And so if that's the archetype that is carried through, right? You can say protect, serve, honor, but if you're in that archetype, when you're in one community, you'll feel like a prison warden, and when you're in another community, you will feel like a guardian, right? And the distinction here is it doesn't have to be, but it happens to be through the happenstance of our historical context to be based on race, right? Yeah. In other societies, it can be based on class or caste or whatever, right? But here it's based on race. So in the safety of sacred space, that is an example of something that can be discussed. What is the archetype we're in? Is it slave patrol, prison warden? Is it warrior, where I'm going out? They're not slaves anymore, they're free. So now I'm the warrior going to protect what's mine, right? And ours, versus the other. Or is it guardian, where it's like I go out into any community, regardless of race, and my job is to protect everyone. And those three archetypes are completely different.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Those are patterns of manifestation that are completely different. And it doesn't matter whether any individual officer is good in their heart or not, or wants to do the right thing. If you plug that person in to an organization where that is the ruling archetype, there'll be tremendous pressure for him or her to follow that pattern. Otherwise, like, what are you even doing here?
Yeah.
What are you even doing here? And you're like, no, we're in the wrong archetype. I mean, you wouldn't say that, but the structure, it's like, we're doing the wrong thing here, but it's like, this is what we do, but we're doing the wrong thing here, but this is what we do. It's like, this is the prevailing archetype, love it or leave it, versus we're in the wrong archetype. And to change the archetype, you don't change archetypes in the profane. They only really change in the sacred.
Right.
It's like surgery. You don't do a heart transplant in the middle of a war zone, ideally. Right? You do it in the sacred space of the hospital, where it's sealed off, no one's allowed in, right? It's a very controlled environment, because a lot can already go wrong, and that's when you do the transplant. Anyway, those are some thoughts. So if you're feeling like, yeah, I've got no playbook here, I'm just hacking my way through the jungle trying to find my way, that's right on. That's exactly where we are.
Yeah.
I'm doing the same thing. Gauri's doing the same thing. And I honor you that you're doing it, even though it feels like you're lost in the jungle. And my validation of you is that you are lost in the jungle, and keep going. Please keep going. Please keep going.
And whatever path that you create will end up, helping the people who are following you. They kind of take guidance from that. So that's amazing.
We make the path by walking.
Yeah.
Walking. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, thank you. And the next question, since you brought up archetypes, is about the artist archetype session that we had.
Okay.
And here the question says, the artist archetype has always been so strong for me. So strong, in fact, that I later carved out 2 separate guiding archetypes from it, which is one is the storyteller and the other is the addict. And the latter in particular began almost as the shadow side of the artist. And so many artists struggle with addiction. If you have, time for this apart from the Q&A. So, I was wondering what your thoughts might be on the shadow aspects of any one archetype, and the artist or addict in particular. It's common to see archetypes traveling in pairs, such as these two. And so basically, what do you have to say about the correlation of these two archetypes?
Yeah, so for me, I don't really think about archetypes in terms of shadow. That's a specifically like Jungian term. I love Jung. I'm very influenced by Jungian thought, but I'm not actually a Jungian. The terminology, the framework is way too rigid for me. And it's too easily intellectualized, right? So for me, anything you call a shadow, the shadow is not bad. It's just an aspect of yourself that you don't see initially or that you're afraid of, right? And so I personally, for me, I shy away from calling anything shadow because it is a part of you. And calling it shadow right off the bat, you're kind of demoting it to second-class citizen. And that just doesn't generally help the mood of reconciliation and relationship building. You know what I mean? Yeah. So for me, you're like, okay, I feel artist, I feel storyteller, I feel addict. Addict is an archetype, just another archetype. It's not shadow to me. For me, when I have experienced the reports of advisees coming to me when they have interviewed their inner addict with the day 3 interview process from 7-day healing, right? It has almost always been the case. Well, it's almost always been the case that its actions have been intended to be protective. It's always been the case that its actions have been in goodwill.
Yeah.
Goodwill, right? I got you into desiring drugs or relationships or sex or whatever to stop the flow of the forward movement in the direction you were going. And it's like, well, I was going in the direction of being a banker or a lawyer, like my dad wanted me to. So, and I would have gotten prestige and money. And so you stopped me from doing that. As a protective, well-meaning measure. Okay, please explain, right? And you need to be in sacred space when you have this conversation, because if you were in profane, you'd be like, you idiot, I'm going to kill you. Right. So in sacred space, it's okay. No fear, threat, and control. Please tell me more. Why did you derail my entire life? And so, when you continue with the addict, they'll tell you why. And the storyteller, to me, is partly this also. Story and narrative is a way of titrating or modulating raw experience. Right? Narrative is everything. Right? So you think about a girl's first menstruation, right? Is it disgusting and unhygienic, or is it beautiful and the wellspring of all life? Right? The narrative is everything. Everything. Similarly, for the addict, is the addict a shadow or protector? Is the police officer a prison warden or a guardian? Right? You can imagine approaching the addict with the archetype in your mind that it's shadow. And the addict feels this from a mile away as you start coming to it. And the addict will naturally follow that archetype. Archetypes have force. They have there's air pressure. There's like, it's like if I ask a question, loaded with an archetype, just like lawyers in a courtroom or whatever, I'll say, Gowrie, I mean, what that person did, you think that was horrible too, don't you? Right. And it's like, obviously there's an archetype there and I'm trying to pull you into it. Right. Mm-hmm. As opposed to saying, oh, what did you think of what happened the other day? Mm-hmm. Actually, just tell me. And so archetypes themselves are a form of narrative. They can generate narrative, but they're kind of beyond that. They're just this image as is, and you can read it either way. So for me, it's like what I've seen in other cases is that the artist archetype will be pushing to open this flow within you. Mm. Okay. And if you're lucky, that flow will be huge, huge. But the issue is that flow then can swallow your life, blast the profane aside, and all the things that your dad and mom wanted for you, all the things that your spouse, that your friends, that your teachers wanted for you, can blast all that aside like Godzilla in a china shop. Okay. And then the question is, in the example of an artist, is this okay? Is this okay for everything to be moved aside? Picasso, I think when he was like 8 or 9 years old, obviously had this huge flow going through him. But I remember reading in his biography, I'm reading another biography by one of his wives, actually, which is very, very enlightening. But in an earlier biography I read of him, his own father, Picasso's own father, was a painter, not a very good one. And when Picasso, by the time he was 7 or 8 or 9 or something, his father literally came to him, handed Picasso his own paintbrushes, and said, I can't paint anymore because that's how good you are. Oh. Right. So was the artist archetype in Picasso nurtured? Yeah. Right. So it's a team effort, right? When these sort of lights come on. If he were born into a different family, the father could have been like, what are you doing? Get away from that paintbrush, like go be a banker, like I told you to. So was there room in your life for that as a young girl or boy? Probably not for most of us in the profane, and you have to stuff it down. Mm-hmm. And the way to stuff it down is you tell stories to yourself, and storyteller and addict, both are protecting you from the exogenous force of the thing that is not letting your artist through. That's just one possible narrative. Yeah. And so, another possible narrative, a more shamey, profane narrative, is that, well, you're not really an artist. You actually are an artist and drunkard, and that's all you're good for, right? But tell that to Hemingway, who definitely had a drinking problem, right? Tell that to Scott Fitzgerald, right? Yeah. So storyteller, artist, addict. The way I see those, my like quick slice is just that there's a flow that the artist is like kind of advocating to open up in your life. And to the extent that flow is blocked, addict will come in to soothe, storyteller will come in to massage. But when that flow gets unblocked, storyteller gets pulled with that flow into the creation of the art itself. And addict gets pulled into that flow as well, which is your work becomes your addiction, for better or worse. For better or worse. I'm not saying it's all good, right? I'm not saying the artist archetype is all good. Yeah. It's just the physics of the thing, right? Where when you are in the full flow of your bliss, soothing and shielding tend to fall away. And the reason is because bliss itself is, it is addictive. It is narcotic in the sense of I don't need shielding. I don't need soothing because bliss feels amazing. I don't need to drink wine. I mean, this work is my wine. Yeah. And the only reason why it's positive, not negative, is because it's not going to kill me, hopefully. And I tend to benefit from it, and other people tend to benefit from it. But it is no less addictive. Okay. And when I'm in the full flow of my bliss, I don't need shielding, because once you're in it, it's like being a heroin addict. You don't give a shit about what other people think anymore. I walk around with a big smile on my face every day. People are like, oh, your hair's long and you're like doing all this stuff online and everything. And once you're in enough of the flow, you don't care anymore. And then you reach the other side where it's like, oh, your hair is long. It's such a great look. And oh my gosh, you're like doing these sessions. It's so cool. Thank you for helping everyone. It's completely flipped, but you still don't care. Because no matter how many sort of criticisms or compliments you heap on me, I still don't like the criticisms and I appreciate the compliments, but they're all a shadow to like the hit that I get when I'm actually doing my bliss itself. Right. So artist, when it's unblocked, will pull addict and storyteller and a bunch of other archetypes along with it. So for me, it's like the best way to manage the flow is to follow your bliss, right? The bliss is the river, like the dry riverbed of how the river wants to flow, used to flow. And when you start sort of flowing the water along that, it's just easy, right? Because the riverbed, like, it charts the path forward for you. So following your bliss is the easiest and just solves a lot of questions around the way. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already coded within you. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you for that. And on that topic of the inner artist, there's the next question, which says, to support your inner artist, can you use affirmations that key in to your desire?
Okay.
Or is that interfering with circumambulation?
Great question. Okay, so the way I think about this is you cannot actually interfere with circumambulation. If you clench too hard, if you overdo the affirmations, it will then cause you to stumble into your next transformation.
Right.
Right. If I affirm, and it happens, then it's like, oh, great, I'm going to keep doing it. And then, I mean, how do you even know what to affirm?
Yeah.
If you don't let go and take guidance. If you're like, I have to control, I have to be the best artist ever.
Yeah.
It's like, if that's your attitude, how do you even know what the best artist even means?
How do you get the guidance?
So tight. Yeah, you're not open to the guidance.
Yeah.
Maybe you have a conception and then you clench and then you make it to the top of that ladder and then you lose all inspiration after that because you're still in this clench mode. Like, you got a download that will last you 3 years, but at the end of 3 years, you're spent. There's nothing.
Yeah.
And so not clenching enough will lead you to circumambulation. Clenching too hard will lead you into circumambulation.
Basically, not getting off the hamster wheel.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you wish you could interfere with circumambulation. You're like, well, if I affirm too much, will I interfere with circumambulation? It's like, yeah, dream on. I wish I could interfere with circumambulation.
Yeah.
So the key hardest question then is, what do you want? And then after you've gotten practice asking what you want, what do you desire? Those are the hardest questions and the most powerful, right? Forget archetype, right? Archetype is just a foil, it's just a gambit to help you name and identify your desire. Oh, I am an artist. I do resonate with that archetype, Artie, when you talk about it. All right, okay. So that's great. But then how? How do you resonate? Yeah, so you are the artist archetype. Yeah, but what do you actually do, right? Are you a healer? Are you a painter? Are you a sculptor? Are you a writer? What do you actually do? And then at that point, when you're filling out the specifics of your own artist archetype, very often that will feel selfish, and that's okay. But fill it out as much as you can. So for me, the first desire, like the desire of desires, if you will, is to see as much of it as you can. Right? It's like, well, I'm a writer. Well, I was like, what kind of writer? What do you like to write? Well, I think it's this genre or that genre. And it's like, well, what do you have? Well, let me see. And I look at it metaphorically, right? And I'm like, well, this doesn't feel like it fits into any genre. Yeah, but my editor says I need to fit into it. It's like, I didn't ask you about your editor. I'm trying to get you back to like what it is you desire. And often if you really flow with the desire, you will end up writing like whatever the fuck you want. That follows no template. And maybe at the end of it, it'll be saleable or not saleable, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right? One of the greatest novelists of modern Japan is Haruki Murakami. And Murakami, I mean, he wrote in a style that like did not fit into anything. It still doesn't. He created his own genre, basically.
Yeah.
And one of the ways he describes it is my novels are like dreams. It's basically like I have a waking dream and I'm just writing it down, which is about as pure as you can get.
Yeah.
Right? It's direct channeling of the muse with not even, I just foraged, here's the fennel I picked from the fields, I just chopped it up and delivered it to you. Right? I didn't even add salt. And so for me, the first desire is to see as much of it as you can. And then it will the more clearly you see it, the more it will just tend to happen by itself. You won't need affirmations. Unless affirmations are part of your art form, right? And then that's fine. But the key thing is to see it, is to see and feel the shape and texture of your desire. And the beauty of that is like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's the trick of that. But the more clearly you see it, the more there's simply nothing else you want. Right? Nothing's better than that. Everything else loses its flavor. The rest of the world turns into black and white. It just falls away. And so, yeah, getting yourself permission to see it is the biggest first step. And if you see it clearly, you won't need affirmations. Or if you do, they'll just happen on their own. You won't need to force the affirmations.
Right.
That's what
Right. Yeah. So there's an interesting aspect that you brought up there, which is giving yourself permission to see that, see the archetype and the deeper vision. And the thing is, there's always some kind of a resistance, and that's the next question. Why do we resist our archetypes? What is the source of that resistance?
Yeah, so this is more of a healing question, but basically I'll just cut to like the bottom line answer. There's all kinds of reasons we put out, but the core reason is, for me, fear of loss of love. Fear of loss of love. You can say, well, I don't want to be an artist because I'm afraid of being poor. Fear of poverty and all of that, it's just foils to mask the deeper reason. So even if I was like, you wanted to be an artist and I were your toxic dad, and I said, all right, you want to be an artist? You can, I'll pay for everything. I'll support you for the rest of your life. You can be an artist. And then I turn to your brother and say, all right, George, well, you better make a lot of money because it's going to be on you and me to feed this useless artist over here. Ha, ha, ha. Right? And so it's not poverty anymore. It's shame.
Yeah.
And it's loss of love. And after a few years of doing the artist thing with this fear, I have to impress dad. I have to make it to prove dad feeding me was, your art doesn't come. It's all clenched. And you give up, you stuff it down, and you become a banker. Right? I mean, another question is like, why does society overall fear the artist? For me, it's like the artist in its many forms is this portal of this divine power flowing through. It's uncontrollable. And that is why we fear it.
Yeah.
Right. If you're a sex symbol, we also fear you, because being a sex symbol is also this like flow of the divine through you, and we cannot control it.
Yeah. Right.
We cannot control it. If you're a rock star, I I recently watched the Bob Dylan documentary directed by Scorsese, right? No Direction Home. And it's so clear that Dylan was just singing whatever came to him. Like he did folk first, and then he did rock. Everyone hated his rock. They wanted him to go back to folk. But it's just like Picasso when he switched from blue to cubism. He's like, you're talking as if I have a choice, and I don't have a choice. Like if nobody liked my folk, I would still be singing my folk. I'd just be singing, on the street with a hat on the sidewalk, collecting pennies.
Yeah.
Right. So everyone tried to control him and label him. They called him a traitor when he started playing his electric rock. And he just plays what the muse puts through him. And he's like, WTF, this is just what I do. And so for me, there's all kinds of reasons why we resist the archetype. But the biggest combination is that the archetype is what flows through us. That is the divine, typically the artist archetype and archetypes of that genre. And we fear that it will cause us loss of love, so we stuff it down. And so this isn't true of all archetypes. Like if you are, if you are a police officer in the Minneapolis Police Department, and your archetype is slave patrol prison warden, then you're not going to resist the archetype, right? The archetype of the police force around you isn't going to resist the archetype. So it's not all archetypes are resisted. And by the way, like when I say something like that, I'm not, I'm just saying from the behavior of, the Minneapolis Police Department is the department that, allowed the murder of George Floyd, right? So it's just, I'm not shaming them per se. It's just like if there's an archetype that fits better, guardian doesn't really fit to me, but we can argue that, right? Warrior protector, right? That doesn't really fit either. We can debate and discuss that. But when I'm fitting it, I'm not trying to shame or vilify. I'm just like, what is the pattern that fits that the best?
Right.
By my analysis, I may be biased. But for me, it's like clear seeing of what the archetype is that makes sense to you is the first step in figuring out where the resistance is coming from and what do you even want to do going forward? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Whatever, right?
Yeah.
But seeing allows you to make a decision. It's like that saying of awareness equals choice.
Yeah.
Right. Once you're aware, then you can start making choices.
Yeah. I was wondering about that when you were saying it. That is, there is an inherent resistance to an archetype which we intuitively know is going to be in conflict with the profane expectations of the outer world. That, this archetype won't help you make money. This archetype won't help you get prestige or, all of those expectations of your family. So when we know intuitively that there's going to be a conflict, I think there's a kind of resistance. But if there's no conflict, then probably it is effortless for people. I mean, whoever that have that.
Yeah, I mean, there's an inertia too. I mean, so for me 10 years ago, there was huge resistance to the healer archetype.
Yeah.
And now the healer archetype is in full flow. And I can't even look in the direction of the tech CEO founder archetype. So that's not the artist archetype in me, I don't think. But there's huge resistance to that.
Yeah.
But because of pure inertia, because this is the healer archetype is my flow, it's my bliss. That's not my bliss.
Yeah.
If I had to move in that direction, there would still be inertia. And then moving from tech CEO to healer was huge inertia because I was in tech CEO. Yeah. So again, for me, it's not good or bad. It's not shadow or the right archetype or the wrong archetype. It's just the physics, right? I tend to see all archetypes as equal, basically, because the ground of my understanding of the world is that there is only one thing that actually exists. That's what I feel.
Yeah.
When Jung, in an interview, I think in the 60s, actually not long before he died, was an interviewer asked him, "Do you believe in God?" Right, and all these other shadow and archetype and Freud and everything Jung answered, the interviewer would drill down and ask, "But what about this? But what about this?" And then he asked, "Do you believe in God?" And Jung just took his pipe out of his mouth and he said, "I don't need to believe, right? I know. I don't need to believe. I know." And then the interviewer was like, "Okay, and then this next question." And when I watched like the black and white film of that, I was like, "Really? That's the question you don't drill down on?" It's like,
yeah. Like, we don't want to go there.
Shit, Profane, right? It's like the one time he opens the door a crack, like you don't walk through. Yeah. It's like, okay, man, whatever. That's cool. That's cool. So, so all archetypes are equal. There's inertia moving from one to the other.
Yeah.
Each archetype has its own physics specific to itself. Like the last session, I was like, you don't make a car go in the same way you make a horse go, right?
Yeah.
And then how you choose your archetype is based on your desire. Ideally, want and need have been taken care of, and you choose based on your desire. And then we know certain things about your desire. It follows a naturally occurring flow within you. Right? There's a thing that makes me predisposed to want to be a healer versus a mechanic or a sculptor, right? And I'm not saying that's the way it should be. It's like that's what we find in the field. So we use that state of affairs that is so to accelerate the fulfillment of our desire.
Yeah.
Right? Like a sailor uses the wind to like go faster. I mean, why wouldn't you? Right? It's there. Right? Why wouldn't you grab it?
Yeah.
Hey, Gary, it's almost noon.
Okay.
Should we end or?
I think you've answered almost all the questions except for, I think we've got one left. So
okay.
We could move that, or we just want to have a quick take on the last one.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the final question is, does aesthetic arrest, which you spoke about in last session, produce a sense of completion?
Okay. Yes, it does. So aesthetic arrest to me, the reason it's static and not kinetic is because it is the experience of the one thing that actually exists. So it is completion. It is this experience of wholeness. It is a kind of enlightenment experience. And that's what a well done work of proper art does for you. Right? I think it's like Aquinas, right? Was it? I think it was Aquinas who said like art is integritas, claritas, and like consonantias or like harmony, right? So integrity, wholeness, clarity, and harmony. So you take there's all this sort of reality that's actually the one thing, and then we chop it up with naming and words into 10,000 things. This is from the Tao Te Ching talk, right? And art brings you back to the sense of wholeness because it draws a frame around something and says, we're going to do a further naming, boys and girls, right? To make the 10,001st thing, right? And we're going to frame this. Everything within this frame is the work of art, and everything outside of it is not. So you're cutting the one thing even further. But the way you're cutting it, the frame, has clarity, integrity, and harmony in such a way that creates this feeling of wholeness and aesthetic arrest within you. So work of art, when you look at it, brings you to that sense of the wholeness of the one. Right? That's why art that's like that wags its finger at you saying like, we shouldn't, use like animal fur or whatever. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's didactic. Right? It's not bringing you to the sense of the whole. It makes you want to go out and like, burn down fur stores, fur coat stores and protect the animals. And that's fine. But it's intrinsically profane, not sacred. Right. Yeah. And so in this, a work of art which produces that, produces aesthetic arrest. And the reason it's arrest and static is because you're in the sense of the one thing that is everything. And the one thing obviously doesn't move because there's no background against which it would move because it is the one thing. Right? There is no second thing. The background would be a second thing. That's why you don't name it. But if you name it Artie, then there's got to be this guy who's not Artie. And there isn't. There's only the one thing. So you don't name it. Yeah. So other examples. So you're meditating actually all the time, in and out. Right? You're experiencing a level of enlightenment all the time. You're weaving in and out of the sacred all the time. And it's only when you realize what it is by the flavor of the feeling, you can draw it out longer and longer, and then a trapdoor opens and then boom, you let go down. Yeah. Right? So when I explain sacred space or I teach meditation and I coax you, I guide you into this state of meditation, right? 100% of the time, people are like, oh, this is meditation. And I'm like, yeah. And people are like, I know this feeling. And I'm like, I know you do. I know you do. Right? I bring you into the sacred, like all this like goat herder and templum and profanum and everything. And then you're in the sacred and you feel like this falling away of fear, threat, and control. Yeah. So it's like good, but also you're like, I know this feeling. I'm like, I know you do. I know you do. So now you can taste it. Yeah. And then at will, you can find, tricks and exercises, even on your own. You come up on your own that draw it out further. Yeah. And so, this aesthetic arrest produces a sense of conclusion. So the answer is yes, but also then when I describe the feeling of aesthetic arrest, like sacred in the context of art, people have been writing in. I was like in the Louvre and I was looking at the Matisses, the 3 panel, and I was sitting there alone and tears started streaming down my face. And thank you, because you explained what that is. You named the feeling. Right? Instead of your kids running in, going like, Mom, why are you crying? Let's go to the gift shop now. And you're like, oh, geez, why did I want to have kids? So it's like you name the feeling and then you decide you want more of it. It's like the Chinese cooking, salt, sweet, and fat. It's like, oh, that's fat. That's umami. Well, I want more of that. And then we put more of it in. You're like, that's the bliss point. Yeah. And like being in sacred space here, this 2 hours of sacred space is longer than most people experience in their lives, even when they go to church, right? And the stamina of being in sacred space for a longer period of time is its own experience, right? And it allows you to deepen the feeling of sacred space. And then further, if you're like, well, I want to run this all the time, I want 90% of my life to be sacred space, not 10. And that's some of the exercises we've given in the past sessions to like build up the muscle. You don't have to do that, but you can if you want, right? And then your whole life has changed, right? If you want, you don't have to. It's just a matter of personal taste. But I guess what I'm saying is the sense of aesthetic arrest can also be elongated.
Right.
Because once you have that eye, you look at anything around you. Like oftentimes when you're meditating or when you're in the sacred, you'll look at some little stain like candle soot on the wall and you'll be transfixed by it. people who have enlightenment experiences. Like Eckhart Tolle writes about that in his main book. I think it's like the preface to like Power of Now. Mm-hmm. He describes his enlightenment experience lying on the bed when he was having his depression. And then he just walks around everything, like looking at everything. And everything is like radiating beauty. People who describe certain states of like LSD or whatever, like describe this as well. But that's different because it's a substance that got you there. So it's like, okay, I forced you to like taste the salt. But it's just a little bit, I mean, that's fine for me if then you try to get there on your own power, right? Because forcefully taking a drug to get yourself there, that it's almost like you're trying to catapult yourself from the profane into the sacred, because it is an intrinsic control, right?
Yeah.
Like taking the drug, the fear of overdosing, the threat of law enforcement, the threat of like, anyway, it's just a different archetype of how to get there. Okay, so I think that's it. It's 7.
There have been questions to explain this whole nature of reality and everything being one thing. For those people who asked, I'm going to link the talk of 10th of May, where you explain that entire Tao Te Ching concept to the nature of reality. I'm going to link it here in Crowdcast and also in the comment section on Facebook, Facebook Live video. So I just wanted to say that, and if you go and rewatch that session or watch it for the first time, you'd get the whole thing up there. So thanks for answering all those questions, Artie.
Thank you. Thank you for emceeing and guiding us. And thank you, everyone, for your questions. And ask more. And in a few weeks, we'll have another Q&A session.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
All right. Yeah. Well, see you later, Gary. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Artie.
And everyone, we'll see you next week in Sunday session. Thank you.